Welcome back to the Dynasty Dingers podcast. It is December 19th. The year is almost over. Joined as always by Doc. Doc, what's going on?
Just living the dream, bro. I'm feeling good, feeling great. Christmas is in the air. USA, America is also Indiana's in the air. It actually is IU, and I have no affiliation or care about IU, but I lost my neutral Santa hats, and this one's really comfy. So
I love it. We have yet another week where you have the festive gear, and this works.
yeah, this is probably our last one, unless we do like a Monday next week. We'll see.
Yeah, we might take the
Actually, maybe we
holidays off.
should. This is like an after. We should talk about this after, but we'll have to schedule this because I'm going away for a couple
I
days.
also thought about how we've been posting. You've been posting on social media the catcher and first base ranks, which you've been doing a great job with, and we've only gotten catcher and first base done on the episodes. So that means we have still the rest of the positions before we get into spring training conversations.
Yeah.
We may not have the time to take a week off. We'll circle back around,
No,
but
we won't go off.
we have a very special guest today. Thank you to you, Doc. We're going to be doing an interview with Chris Clegg that we'll bring on in a minute here, asking him some of the questions that you and I can't answer, but kind of also diving into some of the great topics that we've hit on in the last year. So we're very excited for that. And why don't we just bring him in? Chris Clegg is joining the show. Chris, what's going on?
Hey guys, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and chat ball with you.
Now, Doc, you built the relationship with Chris a little bit, so I kind of want you to give the intro here. But I do want to thank you, Chris, for coming on, and I'll pass it off to you, Doc.
Well, we built a very deep relationship of me DMing him every day for the last 3 years, begging him, please, we need the ratings. All three of our fans have been asking for you. No, it's so Chris Clegg. He is the owner of the Dynasty Dugout, as you see behind him. He works for Rotoball. He contributes at Rotoballer, and he does a bunch of things. He's a he's got this little rinky-dinky podcast called the Tool Shed Podcast. Maybe you check it out sometime. I'll let Chris take it from here, but I got some eggnog, Evan Williams eggnog. It's 5:00 somewhere. Ho ho, Merry Christmas.
Yeah, quite festive there, Doc. Ready to go for sure. I just have my water, so we're good.
He's about to leave, by the way.
Yeah, Chris. So I wanted to get into a little bit just to kind of warm up our listeners. Doc gave us the intro, but you have a plethora of things you do in the industry, and I've known about you for a number of years now. I wanted you to give our listener just a little bit of the history on what got you started and what got you to this point where, from what I know, at least, that you are operating Dynasty Dugout as a full-time operation. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, as of this past February. So, yeah, it's been a long journey. I started writing in 2018, just for fun, small blog. Nobody read it or cared. I think I probably got about 25 readers per article that I put out, but I just always enjoyed that. It actually started with I got kind of disconnected from baseball for a little while. I played growing up, like most people. Got out of it for I was small. I'm 5'9" on a good day, so I was undersized, never had any power, had speed, but I quit playing. I took up golf in high school. I was pretty good at golf, and so kind of got back into it, just the love for college baseball, University of South Carolina. So loved that. Then started playing some fantasy baseball, got invited to a pretty competitive league with some buddies, and kind of was just history from there. Went from just a 10-team redraft to jumping in a 30-team dynasty pretty quick. And you guys know how that goes. We were just talking about 30-team dynasty just a second ago, but yeah, it was just the desire to find and have the knowledge on the up and coming prospects, and always trying to have an edge there. And in a 30-team league, that's invaluable. So, I live in Greenville, South Carolina. I have an affiliate, the Red Sox High affiliates, right here, 5 minutes from the stadium. So I started going to some games and just checking guys out, and trying to find an edge any way I could in the Dynasty League. And I felt like I was kind of decent at finding talent. So I started writing about players and trying to get the word out. Like, it kind of all clicked for me. I think it was in 2018. I saw Julio Rodriguez before he was really hyped. Kelnick was on the team as West Virginia Power down here when they were affiliate of Seattle. Logan Gilbert pitched, but at the time, like Kelnick was all the craze. But like seeing Julio Rodriguez, it was like, this guy looks like a superstar. He's just different than everybody. And so that kind of was like the first moment where I'm like, I don't know, I feel like I've maybe got an eye for this. And so I just started digging in more and more. In 2020 was really when I started writing, and then the pandemic shut down minor league baseball. So that was a weird year to try to get started with minor league baseball, but did a lot of fantasy content. And then just over the years, just started writing more and more, just going to more games, just building industry connections with scouts and people that work for teams and stuff. And through that, just growing and learning as a evaluator. And that's kind of what I strive to do every day, is just be a little better, be a better evaluator of talent. And yeah, it kind of grew. Like I had freelanced for various sites, and I just felt like that there was a space for more prospect coverage that was valuable. A lot of big sites, I feel like, don't always value prospect coverage. So that's why I started the Dynasty Dugout, just have another outlet. Started it in January of 2023. And yeah, fortunate enough that it grew to where I was able to transition and do this full time, which was is awesome, man. So getting to go to so many more games and have the freedom and flexibility to write and podcast more is it's a dream come true. And you know, I'm so thankful to get to work in the space full time. Like I never imagined that this would be me, even though this was kind of a dream when I was little. Like I always dreamed of being on ESPN. Like that was, you know, when ESPN was big when we were growing up, like that was always what I dreamed of doing. And obviously not on ESPN, but still pretty cool. Get what I do.
It is crazy to think, you know, we're all in the same, I think, age range. And your statement is very true. Where the company was and where it is now, and just a difference in about 20 years.
Yeah.
I mean, thinking about how they had Baseball Tonight, which was a staple growing up.
Yep.
They've kind of gone away from, I think, baseball being a revenue driver for them as well. But yeah, that definitely imprints on, I think, all of us, and probably is a goal that I shared as a kid too, and probably what led me to, at least, you know, me and Doc doing this now.
I'd also argue that, I mean, we're in this weird age. What is cable? What is ESPN? Obviously, ESPN has that legacy. I'm not going to disparage them. They're doing pretty high level operation there. I take the job. I'll take the job. But you know, but the internet has just, it's become this huge thing, and where's it going to go, right? Yeah. And things are snowballing. I'm sure you're further along now. I know you're further along now than you were 2 or 3 or 4 years ago when you just said you gave us that little timeline. And you know, Matt, we've been doing this about 1 year now. Seems like it's going all right. I think we could, you know, it's just the sky is the limit with this kind of stuff, and X is just a hotbed for our weird little niche. Yeah. And sometimes, Chris, I mean, Matt, I know you got a series of questions here. I'm sure, you know, the more tweets are seen, I know that Scout the Stat Line has been reached out to by at least one MLB organization. Like, it's crazy because we go in so deep that at some point, whether they're going to always let us know or not, they're going to be checking out different models. They're going to be checking out different feedback on different players in case they miss something.
Yeah, well, and I think kind of to what you were saying, Doc, and this is, Chris, where I kind of came across you. I want to say right after you started with Eric Ross, the podcast. You guys were just so incredible at having real conversations, but value conversations, right? When Doc and I jump on, it's usually opinion based. We're not out at games. We look at the stat line. We may look at film, but you and Eric were able to deliver the knowledge of the prospects at a level that others in the industry weren't doing. And I would equate that to why I wanted to listen. And I had a question for you just in that same regards. You know, as you've built this business and as you've built up your name and your reputation in the industry, how has it been balancing that with your actual life and who you are outside of this? Because it takes a big commitment, as we know.
Yeah, it's gotten tougher. I had my second child in end of May, so right in the midst of baseball season. Yep. So I was actually, I don't know if you saw the story, but I was driving to a minor league game that night. We thought we still had a couple days, and my wife's doctor was like, "Yeah, I think you're good." And so I get there, and she called me and was like, she was like, "I think you need to come home." And so I came home, and she was in labor for 15 minutes, and we had the baby at home, just us. So that was absolute insanity. But Yeah, luckily I got home in time. And so that's been interesting. It's been a different balance with two kids. My son, he'll be 4 in April. So 3-year age gap between them. But yeah, so that's been interesting. It's been better since doing it full time in a way, but at the same time, not like I'm at home more. Like I'm working from home every day. But at the same time, I did 70 games this past year. So it's also a lot of time away. I did trips to Florida this year, which I hadn't done, to be able to do complex ball and Florida State League, do a week at the Arizona Fall League. So in a different sense, it's a tough balance. And also the sense of like life outside of baseball. Yeah, I've realized my hobbies have definitely waned, which is, I don't love that. Like in a way, it's like, I used to play guitar all the time. I haven't picked up a guitar in several years. Played a lot of golf, haven't played much at all recently. And so I feel like a lot of those hobbies have kind of drifted, which is not a great thing. There's definitely got to be a better balance. And I still struggle to find that. I think that obviously the family balance is the most important and something that I'm focusing on first and foremost. But yeah, baseball's really time consuming. And my wife told me, she was like, you're going to work more not having 2 jobs, only doing this. And I was like, no way. And sure, I work a lot. So I won't say I don't regret it, because I think that, with hard work, things come, but also the balance of family, personal life and work is certainly something to strive for, and something that I still have to work on every day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Doc has number 2 on the way. I just had my first. He's 5 months, and
Nice.
I thought of your story, Chris, because we had a birth plan.
Yeah.
Oh, it went out the window, and it didn't come back. But yeah, as soon as the family starts, things change. I think as men, for our wives, everything starts to really hone in on the providership, right? The ability to be there for your kids. Doc, we have segment 1, which I'm going to have you attack. Before we move on to that, I did want to just ask a general question for you, Chris. When you think about what you've built, with the story you just told us about the family and how the impact on timing is, what is the next step for you? Do you want to be within an organization? Do you want to continue to grow Dynasty Dugout? Do you have that cemented in your mind?
I honestly can't see myself working with an org. It's just not the life I really want to live. I've had conversations with organizations, always entertain the conversation, but it's not a luxurious life, in my opinion, for a scout, because they're on the road 200 nights a year. They're in hotels all those nights, and you don't really, for every org's different. I guess some orgs do regional coverage, some orgs do team-based coverage. You just don't really know where you'll be. Analytics, it's be moving and being in an office every day with no windows. I'm not sure I could do that. So yeah, I think that, where I am in life, I would have a hard time, moving to an organization. But I think having the freedom and flexibility with the Dynasty Dugout to do, what I want, when I want, go to games when I can and when I want to is pretty big. So yeah, I think it'd be awesome. Maybe one day kids are out of the house, a little older, to be a scout. I obviously love scouting. Like that's what I enjoy most about what I get to do. And so I think it would be fun to be a scout one day, but just having young kids at home, I can't see myself stepping into that realm with, no LB team's just going to say, hey, you can just scout, the 4 teams you have pretty close to you. So that's not happening.
Have you come across 361 Rich Wilson's podcast and worked in the industry?
Yeah.
He took that stage, right? Was high executive C level for years. And then, after he retired, went back into baseball. And I think there's a lot of beauty in that, because he still does what he wants, but has some like contract work on the side. And, after I think 20 years with him and his little group, they can do that contract work. But after 20 years, as you said, you've already built those relationships. So think about where your relationships will be in 15 years, and things change with time. Doc, what do you think? You want to jump in and talk with Chris on segment 1?
I'd love to talk with Chris on segment 1. It's like, nice, dude. That was fluid. Yeah, man. And so, we work for Scout the Stat Line, but they brought me on to be like the resident dumb guy who just like
personality. Give
weird.
yourself credit.
So that works. So we're kind of like the weird representatives of Scout the Stat Line. We got our guys out there who just crunch the numbers. They have a heck of a model. They're all about the analytics. It's literally called Scout the Stat Line. And for fantasy purposes, I think there's a lot of merit to that for guys who can't go to the park. That said, I mean, even I got the Indianapolis Indians nearby. Watching Paul Skeens last year was like, oh, this is like you're playing on rookie mode on MLB The Show. And I should probably bump it up because these 27 Ks in a row, I'm not sure if it's making sense. It looked really weird. But I would say just in my experiences there's something that you can't replace from in-person scouting. So Matt and I kind of like to bring a balance to the organization, and we were really into that kind of, to striking that beautiful balance and seeing the in-person looks. And so when you are given those in-person looks, you got how many teams are nearby you, relatively speaking?
I've got about 8 organizations within a
great.
half. Closer, within the hour range, about 4. So
yeah. So, and I know it's funny. So I was listening to Toolshed recently, and I'm like, oh gosh, like we have some crossover guys you like. People are gonna start thinking of, why do these guys have the same? I just kind of like middle America teams. I like the St. Louis. I'm Indiana, so I got no real teams. So I'm like, whatever. I kind of like the Royals. You've been bringing up Jensen and Ramon Ramirez, some of these guys. I'm like, those are my guys, bro. But you're seeing them. It's good. You're also validating them in person. So when you do go and get these live looks, what kind of skills or body types, intangibles? I'm not sure if you can really gauge that, or if you ever get, what are you exactly looking for with that kind of thing when you get there in the ballpark?
Yeah, it's different because every player is so unique, and I think that there's so many different skill sets that can work, and that's the fun thing about baseball is you see a Spencer Jones or an Xavier Isaac, and they're massive. I mean, they just have that look about them when they get off the bus, and then you also have a Chase Meidroth or a Jet Williams or Caleb Durbin, who they're like the total opposite of the spectrum, but yet they can make a profile work too. And so it's unique in the sense where, most short guys can't make it work. I couldn't make it work. It was never that good, but it's a game where if you have the skills, you can play. I always like to watch what players do in batting practice, pregame, in the dugout. Like I like to watch those things too, just to be on the game, to kind of see like, what are we looking at? So probably the best thing I saw all year was Walker Jenkins. He is just a tremendous asset off the field, as much as he is on the field, where he studies the game, I think, more than anybody I've ever seen.
How do you get that kind of information?
That's just my eyes. That's what I've seen. So I can't tell you for a fact there's people that don't study the game more than him, but I just watching like during a game setting, like it's like, okay, like he's got it. He's after every at bat, like he's going to the dugout, he's getting the iPad, he's looking at literally everything. He's talking with the guys on deck in the hole, and he's like, hey, here's what the pitcher's doing. I never see guys do that. And he was doing that. Like it's just a different kind of, I guess player in that sense. But from an on the field standpoint, I think they're off the field things like a Christian Campbell. Like Campbell, got to know him a little bit last year when he came up to Greenville, just at the end of the year after they drafted him. His work ethic was second to none. Like you look at him, he was built like an NFL wide receiver. He's like 6'3", like 200, 215. Like he's just built. Like he's like a guy that looks like a incredible athlete. And you knew like he was going to put in the work, just given the kind of, locker room presence that he was. And then this offseason, they put in the work, they changed some swings. He did some bat speed training, and kind of the rest was history. So finding those little, I think, things are huge. And that just kind of comes from, being able to go on the field or in the locker room pregame, which is really nice. But from like a skills standpoint, like what are you looking at? Every player, I think it's a little different. I think the glove's kind of something invaluable. We talk about a fantasy game where the glove doesn't matter, but the glove does matter for a prospect making it. Like you see guys, they can't play the field. They're going to struggle to continue to rise up in the organization. Mm-hmm. And so that's obviously something that I think that's much easier to see in person than from a video. It's hard to judge defense based on video for the most part, in my opinion. So you can see things, in person, and you're like, okay, this guy's really got it. It's getting clock times on players home to first. It's getting pop times from catchers, like if they're able to stick at catcher, because the catching game is bad in the minors. Like looking at stolen bases, unfortunately, doesn't do a whole lot because you see some really, really bad catching up and down the minor leagues. But like the body types in general, I think that, we're looking for are the athletic, good movers. And while there's obviously the outliers that we've kind of mentioned, I think that when you have a good athlete, it typically translates. They're able to pick up things quicker. You're looking at things with the swing. And while a lot of different swings can work, I'm looking for things like timing, like how deep in the box are they catching balls, like all these different things, like bat speed, hand speed, like where are they at in certain spots that, and that's what it's hard to do all of it. So I run a lot of cameras at games, and, I'm looking at stuff after from the open face side of hitters and stuff like that. So with hitters, that's kind of what we're looking at. Pitchers, it's, the ability to, throw consistent strikes. It's stuff matters a ton. I mean, you want to see the pitcher that has stuff. A lot of pitchers can get by with sitting 90 in the minors at lower levels. They have a good changeup and blow hitters away, but you can't really live on that moving up. So there's certain things you just kind of learned over time that, I'm looking at, and, is it going to work as they move up? Is this stat line actually, valuable in single A, and can that continue to progress? And I think that's something that obviously we're all trying to do as evaluators, and something that we'll never get 100% right.
Doc, before we move on, because Chris just mentioned literally our next question.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask before we touch on that, you had brought up Christian Campbell, and I wanted to ask you, Chris, I've heard a little bit that Boston is doing a really good job organizationally with changing swing path, leveraging the power that the body does produce. And I heard that Campbell may have incurred one of those swing changes coming out of college into professional baseball. Is that something that you might have information on, or it may have seen firsthand with some of the players that Boston has really elevated over the last couple of years?
Yeah, they put a big emphasis on swing speed, bat speed. So they do a lot of bat speed training in the off season. Campbell definitely changed his swing this off season. It's still not the prettiest swing. If you watch it, it's like not aesthetically pleasing at all. And you're like, okay. And even when I sat there, when he's in high A at the beginning of the year, I kept thinking like, there's no way this is sustainable. Like there's no way he continues to do this. And he did. I mean, he just smashed all the way up to AAA. But yeah, they are heavy bat speed focused. Roman Anthony added a couple ticks on his bat speed last year. And it was like, I saw a lot of Anthony last year. Then in spring training, I saw him. I'm standing there. I'm like, wow, the bat got even faster. So I asked their director of player development. He's like, yeah, he added like 2 miles of bat speed. Like that's nuts. Like to be able to continue to do that. But again, it doesn't work for everybody. Like there's players in the organization that need other things. And the focus is largely on bat speed. It's worked in a lot of cases. They've developed a lot of hitters extremely well. And so every org's a little different, but yeah, Boston definitely puts a heavy emphasis on the bat speed training.
This is a dumb question, but I want to ask because I've never seen this at a park, at least in the minor leagues. When you're talking about setting up cameras, do you have one behind home plate and then on each side to break down the pitcher's wind-up mechanics, overall video for you to go back and look at? And then secondly, with that, is there any concern that someone may come in and mess with your gear?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had cameras knocked and I miss good stuff, which is annoying. Every ballpark's so different, so you never really know. Like if it's a new ballpark I'm going to, I never really know where you can place it. There's some ballparks where you can, kind of hide them better than others, but some ballparks there's not. So yeah, I run an open camera or a camera behind the plate for the pitcher, and he gets batter, all that stuff. It stays with me on a tripod, and then I mount 2 cameras on the first and third base side that are directly on the hitters, just to get like a zoomed in open face look. But yeah, were several times this year when I missed some really good footage on players because the cameras got hit by somebody or knocked over, and that's really frustrating to deal with. But again, I'm putting it out there, like it's they're fans, it's prone to happen, so you just never know. Like I try to check them like every few innings, but that's annoying to have to consistently get up.
That was an amazing question. It's not a dumb question.
Yeah, not at all.
Well, I feel like it's dumb because Could you? I just imagine like a 6-year-old kid running up to this camera and like just being fascinated with, hey, I want to touch.
Yeah.
That looks cool. It's maybe on a tripod, and the next thing you know, like he's waving it like a flag, and you're like, okay, don't do that. That's
Yeah.
like a $4,000 camera.
No, they're I just do camcorders on the side. So it's
Okay.
like it's not I have a nice camera that I run behind the plate, but the camcorders on the side, they're like a couple $100, but still it's like you don't want to mess with. I
Yeah.
have gotten a lot of funny shots though. Like when you're going through film later, you never know what you're going to see from people, which is always interesting. I've got quite a bit of funny things, or there might be like fans bickering or something, between each other. You never know what you're going to see with the camera shots.
Do they give you media credentials, or is it not even necessary? Is it just kind of, set your cameras up? You've been doing this now for a number of years, so they know you at the ballparks. Is it just kind of like the trust system that you have built?
You have to have a credential to be able to bring stuff like
Okay.
that in. So it's a clear back policy most places for anybody. And I'm not sure if I think you have to have credentials to bring in cameras and shoot though.
I heard that in college ball it was that way. I know there was some gripe this past year, at least that we saw on X, with the Wake Forest group
Oh yeah.
and the way that their media credentials work, which is all political garbage. And part of the part of the industry we need to change, because there is this media revenue stream that especially the colleges have to protect, but it really does hurt the amateurs in the industry. And
Yeah.
not to disrespect the word amateur there, but it's like there's not a crossover, and there needs to be in order for better content to be produced. But Doc, I'll pass it back off to you to dive into that next question that we had.
Yeah, man, this is like the least I've ever talked. I don't know what to do. Just the cars saying bye bye. No, so just to jump on that little thing that Chris had said there, just kind of add on to the defensive aspect of fantasy baseball. It's something where sometimes I'll hear it almost thrown away. Well, yeah, Hurt's not that good at defense, but we don't care about that for fantasy. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Carson Williams, Tyler Black.
Yeah.
If Carson Williams did not have a good glove, I wouldn't have him on my top 100. Frankly, he'd be there, but he'd be further back, way riskier. I always feel like I'm forced to put Carson Williams up more than I want to, just because I know he's going to be able to develop in the major leagues because of that glove. Whereas Tyler Black, I'm super concerned for his career, and I'm rooting for him. But I'm like, dude, you don't have a power bat that I can see so far. It's not playing yet. I'm not sure if your speed's going to play here either. They only seem to trust you at first base. It's going to be tough. So this really matters. Again, like even if it comes down to leash, the amount of time that you're going to be given through a slump. Like look at Victor Scott last year. They were willing to get. He was really struggling. That's my boy, but he was struggling, and they let him battle it out there for a while just because he was so fast, covered so much ground in center field. So moving on from that, though, I would. Again, just bringing up the stat line, pure analytics approach versus in-person scouting. I'm sure there's been times where there's a guy you're excited to go see based on his stats, based on what the hype maybe even, and he just has a bad day. Or maybe you have to figure out, is this a bad day or is there more to this? And maybe the opposite, where you see a guy like, I'd never heard of this guy before, and maybe this one's more exciting, but I've never heard of this guy before. His stat line is like a little bit mid, but there's something special here. Are there any kind of good stories about that, or any kind of just what's your philosophy when you experience that?
Yeah, it's tough. I try to go with a clean slate, when I see players, and that's hard. We all have biases or preconceived notions because it's pretty rare not to know about a player. The prospect world is so, immersive now, and it's so deep, but it's always interesting when you find a player that you've never heard of, and it's like, okay, like there's certainly something here. There was a guy with the Nationals in single A this year, Yorgelis Mota. He was third baseman. Never heard of him before, to be honest. And I saw him in a single A game this year, and he just had that look about him. Like he's 6'3". He was like a really good athlete. Clocked him as a plus runner. He was 19 in single A too. He hit the ball hard, and I looked at his numbers, and they were terrible. They were not good. I'm like, okay, this is weird. So like, how in the world do you balance that? Like, young kid, physically gifted, good frame, good runner, good power, big arm at third. Like, obviously the whiff was the issue. Like, you look at the contact rates, and they were really bad strikeout rates. But it's one of those where like a player like that, like I'm filing him away and I'm like, okay, like got to watch this guy closely because to me, like the eye is like, okay, they have all the skills. They're just missing one thing. So, a player like that's always fun to come upon. Or there's always pitchers like, there's every team has so many arms just because they have to. And you may always discover a pitcher that you really like that, may have not been talked about enough. And I think that kind of happens a lot where there's the pitchers you see and like, okay, like maybe there's something more here. The flip side though, like a player has good numbers and you see him and you're unimpressed. We always have to be careful with the really small samples. And so like, it's a one game, like, baseball is a game where they play a full season and we look at full season numbers and not a single game. So it's always tough when you see a guy and they just look awful. And it's like, okay, what do I do with this? Well, I need to go back and see more. If I can't see them more in person, then I need to go at least look at more video because, I catch a guy and they go, 0 for 4 with 4 Ks, then it's not going to look good. Bryce Matthews, all my looks at Bryce Matthews have been terrible this year. Like I saw Matthews several times and he was not good. His surface numbers are great. He hits the ball hard. He's a great athlete, but the whiff and chase rates or the whiff rates are bad.
I think they showed up in the second half though.
Yeah.
Right? I was super like, no one's appreciated what he's doing about halfway through the season. And then maybe what you saw actually was an indicator of what was to come.
Yeah, he can't hit breaking balls. Like his ability to pick up spin and hit breaking balls was terrible. And then like that's what's, I think got him as he continued to move up. You get better breaking balls as you move up and it's going to eat you alive. And so I think that stuff like that is something you pick up on at the lower levels. Like, Roman Anthony is a stud, but he still has his struggles with breaking balls. And that was kind of evident early on in high A. I think he's the top prospect or arguably the top prospect in the game, but there's still some flaws that need to be worked out and he could certainly be exploited in the majors pretty quick. So, there's different kinds of things with every player. I was just trying to think of some other instances where it's like, you see this guy and, maybe they didn't give you the best look, but there's more there. Maybe it's somebody that gave you a good look over one game and it's like, okay, like this definitely isn't it. So it's a balance. I think you have to, and I love analytics. Like I use as much advanced data as possible in like all my evaluations. I want to see the player. I want to get looks at the player, but like I want to use the advanced data where I can as much as possible, because I think that there's times where, there can be a blend of the two. I think we're so caught up in this age where it's like you're either like all analytics or you're all old school scouting, but I think blending the two is about as good as it gets. Honestly, you have the whole picture there. So that's always interesting to see. I'll tell you, Thyron Lorenzo in the AFL, his catching ability was impressive. All I read was he can't catch, like he's not a good catcher. He was stellar behind the plate. I mean, he has a cannon of an arm. I got him at a 181 pop time, which is extremely good. He threw out several runners over the couple games I saw him. I'm like, all right, like maybe Lorenzo can be a catcher. And, that was the first time I'd seen him. So I think being able to kind of blend all those things together is important. Like having the knowledge, but taking out the biases and preconceived notions to be able to ultimately, form a solid opinion, I think is the best way we can go about it.
Now, Chris, you mentioned while you're talking, I just have so many questions that come to mind. So I'm going to filter some of them out and hopefully we can touch on them at a later date. But you've mentioned advanced analytics. This is something that Doc and I have talked about. Ross and I, owner of Scout the Statline, have talked about. Do you have a source or a connection within your own world where you lean on those analytics for the levels that are not giving the StatCast data? And correct me here, there's a certain name that we use for the actual technology at the ballpark, but the amateur like myself does not have accessibility to those numbers. How do you dig deeper and find that data that you can really lean on for like a Matthews?
Yeah, I mean it's tough. You have to have connections to be able to get them. Unfortunately, minor league ball is weird, proprietary. They hold everything close. I will be interested if that changes now that Elias Sports is the official stat keeper of minor league baseball as of or starting this coming year. So
Okay.
I'll be curious if that becomes more accessible. But yes, it's just all sourced. The DSL data is the hardest to get. And that's really where, I have the least information, but I've gotten pretty much all the advanced data from sources from, various kind of people within the baseball world. So it's I'm very lucky to be able to have access, and it's helpful to see too. So that's why I try to put it in as many like reports and write-ups as I can without like blatantly you can't put it out and be like, hey, here's a leaderboard of everything like you could with AAA with Savant or whatever. But being able to like make it more accessible where you can, I think is important.
And then I think you mentioning Lorenzo's just standout performance that you saw physically, his gifts behind the plate, that to your point was not being talked about and had been kind of the dragging point of some of his prospect appeal. When you look at the offensive element of some of the top performers that we've seen over the last 2-3 years, I think of Ellie De La Cruz, James Wood, a couple names, Brock Wilken this year, whose strikeout rate is really high. These players that have issues with the K and then find a way to bring that K ratio below the 25% that we're looking for. What do you think the big benefit to their game has been? Is it organizational change on their approach? Is it just the simple fact that you talked about with Anthony being, 20 going into 21, where he's aging, he's seen more breaking balls? Why have some of these guys made that work? And why have some of them just been unable to ever figure out that ratio?
I think the hit tool is the hardest tool to develop. And there's various things like one of the first questions I always like to ask a hitter is like, what do you see out of the pitcher's hand? Like, I'm always curious, like what a hitter can see like immediately out of the pitcher's hand. And some pick up pitches exceptionally well. They can tell you what it is like before they're releasing it. And that's pretty unique. Like that's a special eye. And obviously I think the eye kind of starts there, like having that foundation to be able to see and pick up, because they're not going to get those pitches that they want to hit, every time. And it's always interesting, like at BP too, because the coaches are like, hey, where do you want me to throw it? And they'll be like, just throw it down the middle. Like, what are they working on? Like, they're not going to see those pitches in the game. So, but to your point, I think some orgs do. I think, an org like Boston, I mean, they're not putting a heavy focus on just the ability to develop a hit tool. Those guys, they've drafted guys that had it, and they're like, hey, we can develop this further. But like Marcelo Meyer, for instance, his hit tool is not all that great. Like he gets publicized as like this high hit tool plus hitter, but seen him enough, his contact rates, I've seen him enough to tell you that he's not all that great of a contact hitter. Like they drafted in Azan Zantello, who's an incredible athlete, power and speed, but like he didn't need to work on the bats. But like he needs to train for contact. And so I think the individualized approach is interesting and it's something that we're seeing more and more of as well. Like some orgs were very cookie cutter. Like the White Sox were a very cookie cutter org for a long time. That began to change over the last year or two, which is good for them. I mean, their pitching took a major step forward in the minors this year because they took out a cookie cutter approach and like, hey, Brian Bannister's awesome. He's an individualized approach to the game. And the same's true with hitters. Like there's little things here or there where, there's small tweaks that can make all the difference. So I think like a Christian Campbell's interesting because Campbell actually, he was high contact his entire college career. He was the only hitter in college baseball in the draft last year, had 9% contact rate and 90 mile an hour average EV. And so he made contact out of the gate in Greenville last year, but then coming this year with all the bat speed, he didn't. Like his contact rates were pretty terrible, but then it was kind of learning to blend that for him. Like you look at his month-to-month contact rates and it was like 70%, 74%. And then it jumped in June. It was like 81% all of a sudden. And he stayed at like the 80 to 84 range the rest of the year. Clicks with some guys, it doesn't with others. But you take like a extreme, like an Ellie or a James Wood. I think that you can get away with worse contact if you have the traits like they do. Like they have everything else. And when you hit the ball as hard as they do, it can be negated a bit. And that's why everybody like freaks out. They're like, oh, Ellie, he's going to strike out too much to make it work. But when he's not striking out, he's doing immense damage. And that's what matters. So, I'd say it's kind of like a sliding scale in a way where, yeah, obviously we want the contact rates to be good. We don't want guys to strike out at 30% of the time. Most can't make it work, but you have the kind of outliers that do make it work, like those that you mentioned.
Yeah, Doc, and I think that kind of goes into some of the things you and I talk about where, we don't see the players live like you do, Chris, but when we see an Ellie or a James at high A or double A, we see it on film just jump off the page, right? You see the bat speed, you see the raw power. You don't even need to see the average exit velo or the 90th percentile outcome for them. It is right there. It's just to your point, Chris, can they make enough contact at the pro level to be this player long term? Doc, I wanted to pass it back to you and just see if you had any more questions for Chris before we move on to segment 2.
Man, I'm excited to talk some players because we dropped some trigger names in there. We dropped some triggers for me. Brock Wilken, it's the whole. We might as well save it, but yeah, basically the whole industry feels like he wasn't appreciated to begin with. Yeah, and now they're ready to move on. Matt, I feel like I'm gonna get too carried away here. I'm gonna get into my thing next. How do you want to do the next segment? Do you want us to go one by one? Like each of us take a turn? What do you think?
So our next segment, Chris, is just, as we kind of highlighted, it's just getting into players that maybe you might be highly, or you might be a little bit higher on or a little bit lower on than industry normals. And I'm gonna let you and Doc kind of run with it. I only have one name that I'll ask you about at the end, but I'm okay with however we do it. Doc, if Chris wants to start or you want to start, we have some really good names to talk about. Well, kick it off. I mean, our guy, our Milwaukee Brewer now is the first name on your list, and I know we've talked about him a lot this season, but you definitely have been the high guy on Durbin in the industry.
All right. Well, we'll go from Brock Wilken to someone who looks almost exactly like him, but 1 foot shorter. Caleb Durbin, 5'2", 185 pound. Well, he's a little bit taller. He's just a muscle hamster, man. And this is one of the situations where I don't know if I hear enough people talking about his defensive abilities. And Chris, if you've seen him play on defense, that would be great. Just I can see from the register fielding on Baseball Reference, a lot of people don't. They don't necessarily do the basic work, which is just to look there. Like, where are they being played? I'm like, okay. Well, they're still giving Basayo catcher reps at the highest level. He's 19 years old. Well, clearly they're not giving up on that. Okay, so Brasino, they're clearly stopping that entirely at a young age. They're probably giving up on the catcher. With Caleb Durbin, he's AAA on the precipice of being in the majors, and he's playing a good deal of shortstop among second base and third base and outfield. And if you're playing shortstop and being prepared to play shortstop at the major league level, I think you have to have a somewhat of a stellar level of defense, right? And so I think that alone is going to get him on the field. I think that I frankly, I'm going to give I'm going to plant my flag on Durbin here. For fantasy purposes, it's almost higher than real life purposes. I'm seeing like a peak of 40 stolen bases if he gets the playing time. I'm seeing, a great eye. I believe he can, he has that something where he sees the ball out of the hand pretty well from what I can tell. And I'm seeing sneaky power show up. He had 5 home runs in Arizona, which, we can talk about the pitching quality, but we can also talk about 5 home runs. There's 5 home runs in the 20-something games. And he was starting to creep up. I think he had 10 in his last minor league season, about 82 games. So, that's not nothing power. So if we can get to 10 home runs with Caleb Durbin, that's crazy, first of all. I love that. He could easily lead off if that OBP translates over, he gets on base. So I'm seeing a guy, frankly, I have him as a top 30 prospect right now for fantasy purposes, non-debuted, and that's not going to be anywhere close to anyone else. He's not going to be on a lot of top 100 prospect lists, and I know that. And it's like I have this personality where you may not pick up on this, but I'm a little obnoxious. So it's like I do have that tendency. I want to have like, oh, am I just doing this? Am I doing this to just be bold, or is this at all sensible? And of course, I look at a guy, Connor Griffin, I have ranked a little behind him. I understand Connor Griffin's upside is massive, is much higher. He's never played professional ball. So they're not that, there's definitely room for that to happen. Caleb Durbin will never be a top 10 prospect. He's going to stay here. This will be his peak for me. But I just see this as a guy where he's going to the major leagues. He's going to get run in the major leagues. The big question is, frankly, I just think if he was a couple inches taller, this wouldn't be as much of a concern. But it's his height, it's that success historically, and then the ability for pitchers to take advantage of him because he just can't handle. He just doesn't do enough damage when he hits the ball in the major leagues. I know that's a big concern, Chris. This is the boldest take I have. Go ahead, ruin my Caleb Durbin dreams.
I followed Durbin for a long time, since the Braves drafted him, at least. I mean, I know they drafted him in 2021, so not that long, but he was 14th rounder. It always fascinates me when I see a guy that's smaller than me on the field. So when I go on a field pregame and a guy's much smaller than me, it's like your Jet Williams, like Caleb Durbin fits that. Chase Mydroth fits that. Like Durbin's tiny. He's a muscle hamster. That's a good way to do it. His picture is hilarious. He has no neck. He's just so strong. That's it. But he's strong for his frame. He's like 5'5" tops. He plays just way above that. He's versatile, and that's why he's going to make the majors. I think he's definitely a utility type profile because he can play second. He can play short in a pinch. Like, is he a major league shortstop? Maybe not, but he can play it if a team had an injury and they needed somebody to fill in. Like, I wouldn't rule that out. He has the arm for third. He can play left field. The Yankees were giving him a run out there in AAA this year. So the versatility is going to push him to the majors. I'll be interested to see if he can impact the ball enough. As you said, like the EVs are really fringy, like 30 grade power. I do think that he has the kind of profile where he has a heavy enough pull side approach where I think he can get to some home runs. Probably reasonable. I think it's 10 home runs at peak is reasonable to say. Like, is he going to do that every year? Maybe not, but I wouldn't rule out him having 10 home run seasons. He's quick for his size. Like, you don't think that he would be a runner. And, everybody only talks about the stolen bases in the Arizona Fall League. Catching is atrocious there, but he did it in the regular season too. And he has, like, for years. You go back to since he was drafted. He's efficient on the base paths. He's clock time 55, not plus runner in my opinion, but he gets good jumps, gets good reads, and he just makes things happen. So yeah, I think he's going to play with Milwaukee regularly. I don't think they make that trade if they don't think he's going to play for him right out of the gate. And there's nothing else to prove for Durbin at this point. I mean, he'll be 25 in February. So, just put the guy on the field and see what he can do in the majors. His glove can help you in several spots. Like, he's going to be average in several spots. I'm not going to say he's going to be a standout glove, but that's valuable when he can play all over. So he probably plays 4 days a week for him this year, and I think that provides value.
Yeah.
Chris, did you see him go one-on-one with Lorenzo in the AFL, or did I don't have enough data? I'm pretty sure Lorenzo would win that.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're on the same team or not. I don't have that data.
No, they're not on the same team. I do not think I saw a game where Lorenzo caught against Durbin, so did not see that.
Yeah, I was just curious because you had mentioned, Lorenzo's plus defensive skills. That would be a really good test, I think, right? Because the AFL is hard to really gauge, as you had said. Catching's bad, pitching is not what we necessarily want. So you want to try to find those outliers, and those guys go head to head on some of those skills. Doc, you have a number of names here. Go ahead and pick some more out to talk with Chris about.
Okay, I just so I don't turn this into the Durbin show, I can make every show the Durbin show. I just want to. I'm going to shift off of him and into just touching on what you said there, Chris. Stolen base efficiency. That's something where, again, I don't feel like a lot of people pay attention to. They see the big fancy stolen base numbers, and Durbin doesn't really get caught, and that means at the major league level, if you're getting caught, you're not going to get the green light. And like, for example, Cole Young. Honestly, you on your tool shed, I was punching the air a little bit. I was like, no, I like Cole Young. I looked at his numbers and I'm like, gosh, he's getting caught like half the time. It's not like that's not going to play. It's not going to play. Maybe he can work on it, but yeah, just something for people to keep in mind with these kind of prospects. And so yeah, we'll see what happens with Durbin. Let's turn it over to Chris for one. High or low versus the industry standard. Do you have anyone that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I wrote Johnny Farmelo down as the first name. I have yet to see him in person, obviously, being on the East Coast. He's West Coast, but Farmelo is a 5-tool player. I think he could be the top prospect in baseball at some point, and I think he was trending towards top 10 status if he didn't tear his ACL. He's not going to get there next year. They've already straight up said he's not going to play the first half of the year, which he may miss most of the season, unfortunately, because I think he tore the ACL in June, and that could be 12 months minimum, could be more. So we may not see much of Farmelo at all next year, but I'm just super infatuated by this profile because he does everything so well. He's a 70 grade runner to start. He's a plus center fielder. he made a ton of contact this year. Like you look at the surface numbers, you're like, okay, like they're fine, but he ran a 93% in-zone contact rate. He chased it a 20% clip, so high OBP. He had a 9th percentile exit velocity just shy of 103, and that's right around MLB average, and he was 19. So it's like such a well-rounded profile where it's like, God, this guy does it all. And I think he would have continued to soar up the boards. Like he was trending towards my top 10 pretty quick. And unfortunately, tear the ACL, go down. And yeah, it's kind of unfortunate, but he's got a pretty impressive frame, 6'2", 205. And those tools that he has are just so good. So I don't know when we see him next. It probably not till 2026 that we see him, back to full strength, because I think about like a Ronald Acuna when he came back from the ACL tear, he just wasn't the same for a little bit. And so that may be the case with Farmelo. He might struggle when he comes back initially. So I was hesitant even to put that because of that reason, but I just think Farmelo is just so talented as a player. Like he's a future star.
Why do you think a player like Farmelo fell where he did in the 2023 draft? Is it a disagreement in scouting? Is it signability? I mean, Seattle has done such a good job with some of these young high schoolers, bringing in talent in the lower half of the first round or the supplemental picks that they get. Because I think of him, I think of Ty Pete, Colt Emerson, right? One of the most helium we've seen out of a high schooler before he's even getting a full year of pro baseball. But for Melo, at least I saw it on film when I was looking at some of the high school stuff. I was like, this kid just looks different than a lot of the guys taken before him.
Yeah, there's a lot of it that goes into it with there's a lot of name value. There's late risers, and that's a riskier profile. Like if a guy, really took off his summer before his senior year, then it's like, okay, we have a shorter track record versus an Ethan Holiday coming up this coming year, where it's like he's been a name forever, but honestly, I don't think his skill set's all that reflective of a number 1 overall pick. Like he's like 10 overall range for me, just given that his contact rates are really bad against anything that's above 90 miles an hour. But aside the point, like you have those things that happen where, there's the bloodlines. Obviously, a lot of guys have bloodlines that helps their value, right or wrong. There's guys that have been dudes forever. And you have Farmelos who really didn't get a lot of buzz until, really his senior year. And so then at that point, it's like, okay, like, how do we balance this? Is it just did a guy maybe have a hot showcase, or is there actually stuff where we believe that there's the tools that can stick? And with Farmelo, I guess the question was really power. Like, yeah, everybody knew he was a great runner and they knew he could make contact, but like, how else would how would the other tools translate? And obviously it worked out really well, but I think that the Mariners do a tremendous job, like really working, I won't say like the lower level prep ranks, because Farmelo is far from that. Like he was, I think, top 30, top 40-ish for like perfect game. So, he wasn't unknown by any means, but at the same time, like they see a guy and they value him there. And that's what they do. You also sorry, if you have anything to add, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, man. I cleared my throat when my mic was unmuted.
I know you're
That
good.
was enough to shake Chris Clegg, folks. We got him. Folks, we got him. Anyway, no, hey, if you got more to talk about Farmelo, I was just going to, in a little bit, have my moment and say, what do we do with this guy? Because it's his carrying tool. He's got other tools. That's why we like him. He was a top 40 non-debut prospect for me. I just did my ranks, and it's people who say that we're losing talent. Oh, it's the prospect pool isn't what it was last year. No, it's just new names. It's so hard. It's so hard to make that top 100 cut. So actually, I have him just out of respect for the others because of what you said. I don't think he's going to ramp up until 2026, and then he's also still hasn't had the experience. And the Mariners don't seem to rush up their bats if he even stays a Mariner, but with the way they like to trade. But so he's just really tough for me. I have him in the 90s now out of respect for the other players. Ready to move him up in a heartbeat. I'm not sure if this is public information, or where do you have him at now versus where you had him before?
I've held pretty steady with the rank. He's been around 40 overall for me. Just given that skill, I have him at 37 right now. Just some late season graduates kind of bumped him up spots. I haven't toyed with his ranking at all since the injury. Just the skill set's so good. Like there are players that I have bumped down because of injuries, but Farmelo is one where, I was comfortable with that spot. And I thought that it would be even higher if healthy. So I just held him steady there. I won't touch him until he comes back and we see more. I probably won't touch him until 2026, because if we get a month sample at the end of 2025, he's prone to have a bad stat line, if we're being honest, just given the nature of that return from ACL injury. So it's going to be tough. I think people will kind of sour on him, out of sight, out of mind. It'll be
great buying opportunity.
100%.
Yeah, and I think the rust that you talked about coming off the injury is something that everyone needs to be lenient on. And to what you're saying, Chris, they may not give him that that extension where he deserves it. But I think his profile kind of leads into a question that Doc and I have kicked around over the last year. And Doc, you have it kind of listed as one of your big staples within this segment, which is the buzzy DSL players. We see a lot of them, like Jesus Mate from Milwaukee or Emil Morales for the Dodgers, put up incredible numbers this past year, rise up some of our rankings. More of us that are amateurs and don't get to see their film, maybe don't get to see some of that data that you talked about. How are you gauging those players, and are you higher or lower on some of those names that I just mentioned this year than maybe you would be in past years?
It depends. Every player, I think, is unique. I think DSL surface numbers, just throw them out the window. It doesn't matter. Pitching is so bad and gotten only worse. I think that people look at the DSL and they're like, oh man, that guy walked a 16% rate. Well, that was league average. Like, they can't throw, like, we could go get in the box and we'd probably we don't swing the bat and we'd walk 5 or 6 times. Like, just being honest, that's kind of what the pitching's like for the most part. You have your outliers, but Jesus Mate is such an interesting case because his underlying data is so unique from every other DSL player. Like, I've seen all the tweets. It's like, hey, throw the surface numbers out the window. I agree. Like, look at the history of players in the DSL that have 1,000 OPS. Got it. Mate, what he did from a contact standpoint, from the power standpoint, from the chase standpoint is just so different than anybody else. Like, he had a higher 9th percentile EV by over 2 miles an hour than Lazaro Montes did at the same age in the DSL. Lazaro Montes is a monster. He had a ball 119 last year, like nearly 3 mile an hour higher 90th. So that's absurd. He had some of the highest contact rates that we've seen. I think it was 91% end zone. Like, that blows away everybody else. And again, easier to make contact against pitching there. But when you're lapping the field and you're 100th percentile and those stats, like, it stands out. His plate discipline is through the roof. So I look at a player like that and it's like, yeah, he rightfully should be the highest ranked DSL player. Am I a little more conservative on him than most? Yeah, I have him 35. I mean, people I respect have him top 10. Like, Jeff Ponce has him top 10. I have the utmost respect for Jeff Ponce. I think Ponce is the best evaluator in our space. And I mean, that stands out and has a lot of volume to me. Take a Mil Morales, Eduardo Beltre, who I love. I've loved Morales for a long time. Their contact rates just don't stack up. I mean, Mate was like 15% higher contact rates. So you have your concerns about a player like that, where you have to be a little more conservative, because you come stateside, it could all blow up, honestly. But Mate's skill set, I think, is just so different and unique. I have a hard time seeing him come over and not succeed. Maybe the numbers tick back. I'd expect that probably, but that's a different kind of player that we're looking at.
Now, Milwaukee signed Mate, right? He wasn't one of the big international splashes that we've seen, right? He wasn't a top 5 international bonus. I think Milwaukee actually had someone, if I'm correct, that they signed higher than Mate last year.
Yeah.
How do these organizations take these young kids? Because I think we can classify them as high schoolers at 16, 17 years old when they're signing these deals. How do I guess 29 other clubs other than Milwaukee miss a Mate, or is it just pure luck?
It's pure luck in a lot of cases, because they're agreeing with these guys at 11, 12 years old, and they changed significantly. Jose Perdomo got the biggest bonus last year, but he changed significantly from the time the Braves agreed to that deal to the time he signed. And I think that's the major flaw in the system. One of the major flaws. I mean, there's a lot of flaws in the system, in my opinion. I could rant about that, but I think with a Mate, you got a late bloomer. They already had a deal agreed to him, and it worked out in their favor. And there's guys like that every year, I think. And that's why the international market's so hard, because I think everybody just looks at the big bonus guys and like, this is it. But there's so much that changes. Jose Perdomo, his body backed up significantly. He ticked down significantly as an athlete. So as a contact skills, I don't know what kind of player he's going to be, but if I had people tell me last December before he signed that he wasn't a top 10 player in the class and he got the top bonus. So it just shows you how much things change, and things have changed dramatically, like with the signing bonuses for this coming year too. Like you have guys that are at the top that are already agreed to big bonuses that they're going to step into pro ball and not look all that great. You had a Dowell Joseph last year with the Mariners who put up one of the worst statistical years, and I think he got like a $3.3 million bonus. So it's just such a crapshoot, honestly. And I mean, the Brewers do a tremendous job. They knock out the international side year over year. They're going to knock it out again this year. I mean, they don't have any huge bonus guys, but they've got a couple guys deeper down, like a Braylon Antunes, who I really like. They've got a Christopher Acosta shortstop. They've got some dudes that they're going to pop off, and there's going to be some really cheap signings that pop off too for them because they're just that good at what they do on that side.
You mentioned how the international process itself needs significant change. I'm sure you've thought about this and kind of done your own research, but if you were able to implement a new system, whether it's draft, whether it's straight to DSL first and then possibly a signing or then possibly a draft, what way would you reorganize the international signing process?
It's a great question. I think first and foremost, the underhanded deals are a major issue, and those happen for various reasons. A lot of their handlers get a lot of money out of it. So we've seen the things now where there's guys that are older than they actually said they were. I don't know. I struggle with what the balance is. A straight draft, like, does that work? I don't know. It could, but there's also flaws with that too, because there's various reasons. I think that guys wouldn't get as much money. It would do a disservice to players that do deserve the high bonuses. So it's so tough. Like, what does it look like in 5 years? I don't know, but I saw videos of handler posting videos of 10-year-olds yesterday, and they're just pushing those guys, and it's crazy. The international market itself needs a huge reform. I don't have a great answer because I don't think the draft, a straight international draft, is the best answer. What do I think? I don't really know, to be honest.
No, that's good because I don't know enough about it, but I've heard other people say the same thing, that the draft would significantly impact the movement of money. Yeah. And if that's the issue we have right now, why switch to something that would have the same issue or have significant impact on these kids' families?
Yeah.
And I think the underdevelopment of some of the areas that these players are coming from is the biggest issue, right? You have people that are out here looking from a greed perspective to get their own, but it's definitely not working at the moment. And I think changes have to be made ultimately.
Yeah.
But you're right. I think 5-6 years down the road, after a few CBAs hit under the belt and are renegotiated, we'll have those changes. Doc, you're back.
Yeah, man. Friggin', I think Chris hacked our servers because now he's in the middle. This is totally bogus. That's my spot. Kind of mad. I had this bomb to drop. There was something we're talking about how it can be weird. These guys sneak up on us from the international ranks. Back in 2015, it looks like there was this guy. I don't know how to pronounce this. Juan Soto. Yeah, this guy's been he's been buzzy lately, and he was the 25th ranked on MLB.com back in 2015. And maybe one day he'll catch up to Christian Pache, 14th there. It's crazy, right? And of course, sometimes you just can't tell. Everyone's sending their best out there, and even then, it's like it can be just they're so young, and there's so many layers and sometimes elements that they have to physically unpack themselves, or the organizations have to bring out of them. So it's fascinating. And yeah, I think in general, I'm very hesitant to spend a lot of dynasty capital on these DSL kids. But yeah, at some point you have to trust the scouts with a guy like Made.
Now, we have two names that I really wanted to touch on it. And Chris, if time gets tight here for you, please just let me know. Doc and I, we run long every week. It is kind of our calling.
Usually at most an hour and a half, but yeah, that's
we don't think many people listen to just him and I banter for an hour and a half. We have Brock Wilken listed under you, Doc, as a high guy. And Chris, under you have Braden Taylor listed as a low guy. I just broke these guys down. I'm going through the 2023 draft and just reassessing the players. And I was very surprised to see their K rates at AA actually very close, and Braden Taylor actually pretty disgustingly above the 30% K mark. I wanted to ask you, do you believe that Wilkin or Taylor can be serviceable starters at the hot corner, or maybe Wilkin moves to first? And then secondly, why did Braylon Taylor go from his high A numbers, batting 260, having such a great slash, I want to say it was 13 or 16 home runs, to such a massive drawback once he hit AA?
Yeah. So one, the Southern League is super weird. It was the worst hitting environment by far. So Taylor went there. Brock Wilk would have been there AA as well. Milwaukee's in the Southern League. But Taylor is interesting. He got a lot of buzz, obviously first rounder, and he performed. I've seen him out of the gate. I saw him when he was with Charleston in single A. Saw him a ton this year in high A too. And I've just never been infatuated with the profile. The underlying data's never been all that great. He on the surface is like, okay, like this guy would make a ton of contact, but he ran like average contact rates at best, and they kind of trended downward all year to a well below average rate. Like his final 150 plate appearances, 64% contact, not good there. And it, like I said, steadily was like a decline for him. He's passive to a fault in a sense. Like he's not going to chase a lot, but he also is going to get into bad hitters counts, and he's not going to see great pitches to hit. Taylor, in my opinion, below average athlete. He's not the best runner, and people cite the stolen bases. They're like this guy hit 20 home runs and he stole 29 bases last year. Like he's got to be a power speed source. I don't see that. Like Taylor's not a great runner, and his reads and jumps were average on the stolen bases I saw. And you also look at like where he hit the home runs in high A. There's some parks in high A that are just like major hitters ballparks. Asheville is 290 out in right field, so you can hit a pop-up and leave the yard there. I've seen that happen plenty of times. Like some in Greenville. Greenville's a pretty favorable hitters park. A lot of ballparks, I think, play pretty hitter friendly in high A, the Sal. And so I guess it kind of depends, like kind of looking at where he hit the home runs and, where he hit them in AA as well. 4 of his AA home runs came against Miami in Pensacola. So that's obviously interesting to see, like, certainly something kind of going on there. I don't know the exact park factors Pensacola off the top of my head, but, something of note. But for me, Taylor's just average kind of across the board. He's a good glove. Like he's played fine. Is he a third baseman long-term? He plays a lot of shortstop. Like, is he a shortstop long-term? I don't really think so, but he could stick on that left side of the infield at third base. Probably he could play some second base too. I'm just not a big believer in the bat. The underlying data, the EVs aren't great. Contact's not great. Doesn't chase, which is good, but I just don't see the buzz with him. And I've seen him in fantasy circles talked about as like a top 25 guy, and I'm not in the top 100 on him.
Yeah, that's crazy. He does fit the Rays profile though, right? That super utility that can play 120 games, bounce them all over the place. And then, just talking about Taylor there, moving into Brock Wilkin, was hit in the face of the baseball. That's my biggest takeaway from 2024. I don't know what that did to him in regards to his confidence at the plate, his ability to turn on the ball. We saw the career change after Giancarlo got hit in Milwaukee from Mike Fiers. I equate that to a lot of some of the drawback from Stanton. You saw the immediate stance change, right? Now, do you think Wilkins' numbers from 2024 are evident of what we should expect moving forward? High K, more of a Rhys Hoskins profile, or do you think he can get that batting average back to where it was junior year at Wake Forest, where maybe there's some more balance and he can be a 250 hitter?
Yeah, I think that Wilkins certainly interesting case where obviously you have to factor that in with what happened. I mean, that's an extreme injury that nobody should have to face. And on top of that, like you can go to his AFL numbers too. I can tell you there were some off the field things at the AFL. He just honestly would rather have been at home with his family. And so I think that probably factored into the performance there. So Wilkin as a hitter, I still believe in the power kind of bat. I think the Hoskins profile is probably a pretty good comp because outside of Wilkins' junior year of college, there's always been the major questions about his contact. Like his contact rates were pretty good. I'm pulling him up at Wake Forest, and they were pretty solid his junior year. But still, I mean, from a standpoint of like in comparison, he was 77% overall, 82% end zone. That 82% end zone would have been below average. The 77% overall was probably closer to average, maybe slightly below average for the draft pool. But that was significantly better than any other year he had at Wake. So like right now, he's really only got a 1 year sample of making good contact. So I think the Hoskins profile might be it. We know he's got the power. We know he can hit the ball hard. He's not going to chase. He's going to get on base, but I think the batting average floor is probably pretty low with Wilkin. Do I think that the injury, getting hit in the face, affected him? Yeah, absolutely. I do believe that. But also at the same time, like Wilkin also ended the year, like he was fine actually when he came back. And then towards the end of the year, it just got really, really bad. So maybe some of the stuff off the field had kind of carried into the August, September timeframe. I'm not completely sure. I know that there was some stuff in the AFL, but aside the point, like I think Wilkins going to be a 30 home run bat at points, but it may come with a 220, 230 kind of average.
Yeah, it's just interesting to think about when we talked about just what we're doing, right, is evaluators, statistical analytics, and then you have the players who, you just said it, he wanted to be home with his family, and it's a long year, right? And those are aspects that go into the game. We think all the way back to the Hamiltons. That's Josh Hamilton, where it's like they're human beings too, and that's something we just don't see in the numbers. You talked about Walker Jenkins and his leadership approach, his professionalism, and you only see that, I think, if you're at the ballpark like you are. You don't see that necessarily unless you catch someone like yourself on X or a social media platform speaking volumes on that player. So I always find that to be interesting. You have two names that I'm actually not so familiar with, Doc. We just had one of these names go in our.
I got to
30,
touch
man.
Wilkin, bro. I got to touch on the Wilkin.
Yes,
subject.
jumping on Wilkin because you have loved him
we'll
for
work on getting him out of here.
a year and a half.
We'd love to have a 5-second talk on Noah Cameron before we're out of here because I think he's interesting. I'm sure you've got to look at him. It's a little bit of a slightly deeper dive. Braden Taylor, really quick. Yeah, he's exactly what Chris said. Basically, it's like, man, he was for the first half of the season without doing a deep dive. He didn't seem flashy. I'm so weirded out with Rays prospects. They just handle them so weird. Are you going to be a platoon bat? Are they going to take forever with you? Are you going to get traded? That's going to be a mystery box. What happened to Curtis Meade? Is he alive? These kind of questions. And then Braden Taylor, though, but then he just fell off a cliff. And so, yeah, I have him. I'm giving him some credit. He's barely inside my top 100. But Wilkin is the guy for me. I just felt like he didn't get a lot of bad things happened. So, first of all, I think you're correct in that no matter what, we're looking at probably a 230, maybe 230 to 2. I think 230 to 250 is the realistic range, maybe 250 being the upside versus like a 250 270 guy. That said, he was in a deep class, and that power could have been overlooked. I think you put him in this year's class. The questions that we're asking about Jack Kaggs, Charlie Condon, and it's like Wilkins kind of that guy, and in terms of tremendous power and hit tool risk. But we're kind of overlooking that with these new guys, the shiny new toys, and Wilkin never really got that same level of hype just because of the unbelievable nature of that draft class. And then he comes out and gets his face blasted in. We're talking about the ability to see a ball, right? I don't know, but if your face gets blasted up, is it possible, at least early on, your vision's a little bit off? Does that affect how you approach your at-bats in general? And then by the end of the year, is it just accumulation of things? Good to know. I'll be praying for him, but good to know there was something off about the fall league, because by then I thought maybe that would be a good redemption tour, and it was not. I would say something people are overlooking is that even in this cruddy year, he had a couple mitigating factors. One, 13% walk rate, and that's what kind of caught my eye coming out of college. I'm like, okay, this guy seems to have some OBP capabilities, and so if he can just get on base, take a walk, and slug bombs, I'm in, man, because that's 30 home run power. And if you can ever develop an even average hit tool, it's like, are we talking 35 plus? Okay, maybe, right? He's got that power. And the other thing being, he only had 9 games, 22 plate appearances against younger pitchers. It's like a weird age. He was 21, which we don't think of as that young, but at AA, he was young. And he still, even in this cruddy year, had a 364 OBP against younger pitchers in that very small sample size. But it's like, that was a challenge. It was supposed to be a challenge year for him anyway, which shows you what the Brewers think of him, and they're a smart organization. So I don't know. I think that I'm not giving up on him. I acknowledge there's tremendous risk here, but I think it's a good buy low opportunity. And so I'm not sure if there's anything either if you want to go off that. I know Chris already had a big Wilkin run, and you said you had a couple names there, Matt.
Yeah, Chris, you had mentioned a couple guys that I was going to say I'm not too familiar on. We have one that's from this past draft, first being Jimmy Crooks that you're high on, and then Griffin Burkholder. I wanted you to just touch on those names real quick and give myself and the listener the reasons as to why you're high on those guys.
Yeah, the Cardinals, they do a good job with catchers. They've developed a lot of catchers over the years, but Jimmy Crooks never gets talked about, but he's pretty insane behind the plate and at the plate. I mean, the slash line, it was really good. 321, 410, 498. He hit 11 home runs, and he missed pretty substantial time in 2024. He missed both the beginning and the end of the season. So it's pretty insane season. Good contact rates. I mean, they're average, like 73% overall, 81% in zone. But the chase rate's really good. He showed a good walk rate, near 12%, 25% chase. But he gets the cover off the ball and has like an elite quality of contact due to his launch angles. Had a 107 ninth percentile exit velocity. The batted ball angles plus exit velocities like comp to Dalton Rushing, like in a pretty crazy way. Now, I'm not comping him rushing a bit, but I think just those batted ball numbers, angles, etc., they stand out. He threw out 33% of attempted base stealers, which is like elite for a minor leaguer. And he's 23, or he'll be 23 for next season, but Double A, like those are some pretty crazy numbers. I put him sixth in the Cardinal system. I don't think anybody like talks about this guy at all. They've got a lot of catching depth, but Crooks might be better than all of them, to be honest.
Do you think he surpasses Herrera on the depth chart maybe come 2026?
Yeah, I wouldn't rule it out. Like they've even shown hesitancy to play Herrera last year with Pedro Pages. And I think if Crooks can continue to do what he did last year with the bat and the glove, then it's going to be hard not to play him. So yeah, super infatuated with that profile.
What's in the water in Missouri? What are they feeding those catchers out there? Because Kansas City has got a crazy, first of all, you got Perez already in town. Fermin's all right. But then the guys coming up, Jensen, Blake Mitchell, Ramon Ramirez, probably not sticking, but we'll see. We've already kind of talked about those guys here, but just very interesting that you brought up St. Louis is kind of doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Next name you had was Phillies pick Griffin Burkholder. Looks like high school pick from this past year, second round, 63rd overall. Not much pro data. I mean, none. He has 2 at-bats, 1 hit, great average. What are your thoughts on Burkholder?
Burkholder kind of goes back to the draft conversation we had earlier, like why guys don't go as high as they should maybe, and Burkholder's still a question. So, maybe it's 63 overall. It's like, okay, like that's fine. But Phillies gave him a $2.5 million bonus. That's double slot value. Same bonus they gave their first rounder, Dante Nori. Burkholder had a hamstring injury that, kept him playing inconsistently during his senior year. So limited teams looks at him for one. The Phillies brought him in for a workout pre-draft, like a couple weeks before the draft. And he had just a tremendous showing. He's pretty off the charts, like kind of checks a lot of boxes that I look for, like why I love Roman Anthony, why I love Johnny Farmelo. 70 grade runner, 6'2", 195. He's got the same frame as Farmelo. I mean, he's got the EVs as well. Like his triple that he hit, he had the small pro sample you mentioned, 101 mile an hour triple that he smoked, and he showed off his wheels then. His prep data was incredibly good. He was actually had faster 60-yard sprint times than Johnny Farmelo did. I mean, just insanely impressive. And the power's really good too. He gets the ball at ideal angles, gets it in the air consistently. Exit velocities were really good. So I think the frame still has some projection left. So like he's a borderline top 100 prospect for me already, just given what could be. And he's like a sneaky FYPD pick. So I don't think most have him high, but like he's a top 20 FYPD pick for me, because if you want to prep that, like this is what I'm gambling on. I'm probably not paying up for the Connor Griffin, Bryce Rayner range when I can get a guy that I think has all the tools there later in the draft. So, Burkholder checks a lot of boxes. So pretty excited to see what he can do in a full season in 2025.
And Doc, I wanted to ask Chris this next question. You and I talk about this a lot on our show weekly, where we try to gauge DSL, A ball, then the jump to high A, and then double A. Chris, I've seen, at least from my own scouting the stat line, a big jump in the difference from A to high A. And it looks like Burkholder will probably, if he has a good showing at A, see some time at high A in 2025, I would hope. Do you see the same, the big jump and the big deviation between players that could have been and players that are after they make that jump from A to high A?
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the bigger jumps right now. Probably as big of a jump from AAA to the majors. That's obviously the biggest jump. But single A, the problem with the squished rosters, like the 165 limit on the domestic side, is that now you're just seeing guys get pushed more aggressively, and single A is really bad competition. The complex kind of became DSL 2.0 for a lot of teams. And then now single A is almost DSL 3.0. I said on some Astros single A games, and they only had 2 domestic players. They were all internationals. And that's not like a bad thing, but it's like that's kind of the way that teams have restructured it. Now it's like they're just going to get more aggressive with their draft guys, and then they can take a little longer to develop the international side in most cases, because honestly, it's a big jump to come stateside. So, the competition in single A is very watered down. Yeah, you're going to have your outliers. There's going to be guys where, there's teams that have good guys. You're going to face one really good pitcher each week. Probably you have your Tampa Bay Rays, where Charleston's rotation was really good. They had Santiago Suarez, Gary Gill-Hill, Trevor Harrison. It's a long list of good arms, but for the most part, teams only have like one good arm. And so that kind of filters into some numbers. And I think that that's a pretty substantial jump in a lot of cases for a hitter, even a pitcher, to jump from single A to high A.
Awesome, Ned. I appreciate that, because other than the stat line, that's all we have. And I think we've seen a number of names. DeVries this past year, I think, jumps out as a younger guy at single A, where that goes right into what you're saying. That may change my evaluation of what he did, because I have wanted to, and I will see in 2025 the higher increase in levels. But great information there, Doc. We have 3 more names that we wanted to touch on with Chris before we go. I'm gonna let you take the reins for Cameron, Kaysen, and then our new to the show, Moss.
Yeah. We'll try to blast through this. I guess my big thing with Noah Cameron is I'm a sucker for the low velo guys. I try to zig when everyone else zags, because I see a guy like Justin Steele. I know he's not the rule. He's the exception. He's a weird exception because he's only got 2 pitches, and he's sitting around 91 most of the time. But it just shows that if you're a pitcher, if you got that pitch ability, you can make it work. And I love Cameron's body, 6'3", 225, 220. He's a little older, 25. I'm especially with pitchers, I'm not too big on that. Just some people develop at their own rate. He's kind of just been consistent at every level as he's come up. It sounds from what I understand, he ran into some road bumps last season in terms of getting that swing and miss, and introduced more of a cutter, which has been a help. And so I'm just wondering, I believe he's got a 4-pitch mix. Curveball is pretty nasty. I forget the other breaking ball off the top of my head, but do you think that Noah Cameron, it seems like he just got added to the 40-man roster, and with Singer heading out of town, it's going to be between Noah Cameron and Chris Bubic as in a competition for the 5th roster spot, rotation spot there. And we're getting late in the podcast. And so we'll see if Noah Cameron can handle it. What do you think? Do you think he can be that quintessential crafty lefty?
Yeah, I think he's the best arm in the Royals system. He's really good across the board. The stuff's not flashy, but he just gets the job done. Throws innings, can go deep into starts. It's a unique profile from a higher release point. He did make a pretty substantial velocity jump. He averaged 91 in 2023, averaged 92.3 in 2024. Still low 90s, but certainly anything helps when you're in that range. Creates decent IVB and good horizontal. He does throw a cutter, which is interesting. Mix kind of bridges the rest of those pitches. Changeup and curve were the big bat missing pitches. Changeup's a great pitch, heavy fade, good depth, around 80, upper 70s curveball. Kind of 12-6 movement at times, just kind of drops off the board. So I think that Cameron's biggest deterrent is that he lacks like any pitch with like good east-west movement. So adding a slider would be a good help, but he's a good strike thrower. Like he was a plus strike thrower last year at 67%. He's been in the minors long enough, gonna be 25 years old. I don't know what they're waiting on, but I think he's ready to be a really solid starter.
We have Kellen Moss in the same organization that Doc and I talked about last week when we broke down the STS top 10 first baseman. It was a name that I had never heard of. When we introduced him onto the show, we hadn't done enough research, so we both kind of looked through Baseball Reference and some of our other analytical sites, and we kind of fell in love. Very small sample size. He went to Seton Hall, drafted out of Seton Hall, if I remember correctly. What have you seen with Moss, and are you excited, or are you tempering some of your excitement to see what he does in 2025?
No, he's another one. I mentioned Mota, but he's one where you have no clue about him until he just pops in the lineup one day in Columbia, and it's like, who is this guy? And he's got a great story. He was an undrafted free agent from a D2 college, Sunshine State Conference. Like, I don't even know like anything about that, but he was good there. He played some indie ball within the Appalachian League, which was, I mean, he smoked it. He was the league's MVP and put up impressive numbers, like with his first true sample of wood, like with wood bats. And I mean, he had an average EV there of 93 miles an hour, 45% hard hit rate, 24% barrel rates, just stupid. And then he stepped into pro ball and hit. And when I saw Moss the first time, I was like, okay, like not expecting anything out of him, because it's like they just got this undrafted free agent they're throwing in single A, but he's good. He has a good feel for pitch recognition, picks up spin well. I mean, he made in this small, like 22 game pro sample, 81% overall contact, 9th percentile EV near 106. He topped out at 111, which, I mean, that's big power considering he just turned 21, like at the end of the season, chased a 20% clip. And like, we take those data points with a grain of salt because 22 games, but it's like, all right, this guy also just performed in the Appalachian League as well, and with wood bat, and was really, really good. So I think there's something here. I'm not going to like shove him like and go all in on him, but I think that if he comes into 2025 and looks the part, like he's certainly going to move up boards because he checks a lot of boxes that you want to see. When you hit for power, when you don't chase and get on base, and you make good contact, like pretty impressive for an undrafted free agent.
Some of those numbers you just talked about, when we discussed him last week, just after kind of grazing the surface, I thought similar batter profile to Davison De Los Santos. Now, it looked as though his chase and his K rate have, through every level that he's performed, always been better. Is that a profile that you would pair him with, or do you think he has an ability to make better contact with a lower chase than Santos has, which has been Santos's big drawback, right? People just don't think he will be able to hit enough at the majors.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that he makes more contact than Davison, because like that's like bottom of the barrel for minor league. I mean, he had like the highest chase rate in the minors last year, like 45%, and the contact rates are pretty poor. And so, like, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I think that Moss will make it 81% contact rate as he moves up, but I think that's a good starting point. And if he does that, you know, he was 21 years old. If he can do that in high A, then next year and just put up 75% contact rate, then he's leagues ahead from the standpoint of Davison, from the standpoint of contact and plate discipline kind of profile.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. Our good friend of Got the Stat Line, Louis, is not going to like to hear that. Okay, we have one more name left for you, and this is what I'm really excited about, since you have such knowledge on the Boston organization. We had a writer last night kind of reach out to us and talk about Conrad Kaysen. I want to say 8th round pick for Boston. He had information within the organization that this could be a player that, you know, years down the road could be looked at a top 10 pick in this past draft. I know nothing about him. I wanted to just get your thoughts and maybe a profile from you with your knowledge of the organization.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly somebody that they love. They kind of bought him down a bit in the draft just to kind of make numbers work. He got a $1.25 million bonus. So that speaks volume for an 8th rounder. I know internally the Red Sox want to develop him as a two-way guy. I'll be curious to see if that works out. That's a tough needle to thread. I mean, Ohtani obviously made it work, but nobody else has ever been able to make that work. So we'll see. But on the mound, like, he kind of has a like Tink Hintz frame, and he uses a high leg kick, which also when I watch him, I see a little bit of Tink Hintz in the mechanics, but high leg kick, big arm speed, fastball's been up to 98, but he normally pitches like low to mid 90s. And he locates pretty well. And he was kind of a late riser from a pitching standpoint, but on the secondary standpoint, curveball in the upper 70s, shape's kind of inconsistent. It's like a slurvy pitch, change up still a major development, but one that I know that they'll be working on with him. So it's a 2-pitch guy, and you hope he develops a changeup. But the athlete's kind of off the charts here. And if he doesn't work out as a pitcher, then he can play up the middle. Like, he's got great speed. He's got good bat speed, easy juice. I mean, the swing's a bit long at times, but as a prep, like, he did make enough contact, and he's a good enough athlete to play short or center. Like, he's going to stick up the middle, in my opinion. 3-sport high school athlete, so he never really put a huge focus on baseball. It's always interesting with these guys. Like, you always want to bet on the athlete that truly focuses on baseball when they get drafted. But we've seen that also not work out for guys like a Lonnie White's one that comes to mind, where, he was a 3-sport star, was a four-star receiver going to Penn State, but Pirates give enough money and he just never hit enough. So, Kaysen's skill set will be interesting, just given that he's got so many skills. He can pitch, he can play up the middle, he can hit. Like, what is it? We don't know. I'll get a better read in spring training when I get down to Fort Myers. But yeah, he's one to bet on and gamble on, I think, if you're an FYPD, just given the athlete, the skill set's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and Doc, you and I talk often about who is the first guy after Ohtani. We thought maybe Eldridge last year with the Giants would be given a shot. I think, is it Crawford that they had issues with and weren't able to do the two-way? So we are waiting for it, and I hope, just as fans, that we get an opportunity to see that crossover, even if it happens to just be a closing job. But Doc, any other questions that you had for Chris today?
Man, this is one of our longest episodes. I think we're good, but I just want to say we're gonna crush the Dynasty Dugout. Y'all, no, it's great to. Here's the thing though. Rising tides, blah blah blah. I'm the guy who's like, the cream of the crop will rise to the top. There's some folks out there, maybe they wouldn't want to have another podcaster on there. I don't know how it works, but it's a niche, right? Sometimes, it's like a SoundCloud rapper. They get all nervous about the other SoundCloud rappers. I'm like, bro, just do a good job. Do your best. Hang out with good people. And I appreciate you coming on our podcast. From what I can tell, you're a pretty good guy. So I appreciate you having you on. I don't know about Matt. Maybe he regrets
it. Yeah, Chris, we do appreciate it. Before we go, though, I wanted to give you the opportunity to just pass along to the listener. Obviously, Dynasty Dugout is a podcast that you're on with Eric Cross. It's where I actually found you. But pass along to our listener where they can find you.
Yeah, on Twitter, Chris Clegg, MILB. You can find me there. Dynasty Dugout, Toolshed Pod. Yeah, definitely support all the good work being done in the industry. There's a lot of good outlets, man, doing a lot of good things. Like you said, I think too many people see it as a competition. There's jealousy. Just, like you said, everybody should support and support people that they connect with and support people that help them be better. And that's what we should be doing, is helping people be better and helping grow the love of the game. Like, that's why I love it. Just growing minor league ball. Like, that's what I love doing.
Yeah, no, that was really well said. Well, Chris, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you both for having me.
All right. A big thank you to Chris Clegg for joining the show today. That was fantastic. And if you were a follower for us through the year, we like to run long. I hope you got an opportunity to listen to everything Craig was able to pass along to us. It was great content that, again, Doc and I may not be able to provide you because we're not at the ballpark like Chris is 70 times a year, as he had mentioned. But before we wanted to say goodbye today, Doc, do you have anything for the listener?
Yes, this episode was sponsored by Evan Williams Eggnog, mixed with Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey, blended whiskey, rum, and brandy. That was so weird.
It's okay. I mean, I did mention that it's...
I'm still your huckleberry, ho, ho, ho.
The holiday Long Island, I guess, is the eggnog. All right, guys, catch us very shortly. If it's not next week, it will be the following week. We will have second base STS top 1 through 10. We will catch you next time.